Hello. So this is going to be the first lecture in a small series that talks about relationships, friends and family, as the title card says, but some other romantic relationships are going to be touched on in here as well. Most all of this is not from the book, and this is an opportunity for you to get some more insight into these principles, more than what the book talks about, especially in regards to friends and family, which honestly we end up sort of short shrifting a lot when we're talking about relationships. Let's dive in. And first, I want you to think about the types of relationships that we have with people that are meaningful in some way, right? So we have, and I'm just going to put out there 4 different types of relationships. That's not a hard and fast number, and you don't need to know that necessarily, but to think about these different categories of relationships, and I want you to consider what makes those people fit in those different categories, right? So lover, and I couldn't think of a better name, sort of short, simple name for it, but it's a romantic partner. And that one is in some ways the easiest to define most of the time, though sometimes relationships can be a little tricky whether or not it's romantic in nature. But we think of it as being a relationship that is intimate, but intimate just means being close to somebody, not necessarily physical. And that's what we think of with lover, is that the relationship has a physical, some sort of sexual dimension, even if you're not having sex, that you're with each other because of a sexual attraction, which many, but not all people feel, right? So that's lover. So family, just move down one. Family seems like a really obvious one. I mean, family is family. But I want you to think about, what does family mean? Who's in a family and who is not? Is family a matter of birth? And if we have birth, do we add in adoption? So, which I would, by the way, in a family in which we've had a lot of adoption in my family. Um, I'm one of 14 grandchildren on my dad's side, and 7 of us are adopted, right? So, and actually, my parents have 5 children. One of us is adopted as well, right? So there's a lot of adoption in my family history. So we'd probably say, well, I mean, okay, adoption, all right. Then what about people who marry into the family, right? The in-laws. What about when somebody is what we call a step, right? What about people who aren't actually family by any legal definition necessarily, but they feel just like family? Somebody who's called an auntie who's not. So what makes somebody family? That gets sort of tricky. A friend. What's a friend then? How does a friend differentiate from somebody who feels like family? How do you differentiate friend from lover? Is it just there's not a sexual connection? I mean, what is that? And then you have colleague, or any sort of professional relationship. Colleague suggests you work together. But so there's colleague, and I want to say, and other professional relationships. So maybe you have a relationship with somebody that's a professional relationship because you work someplace and they come into that place of work, but they're not your colleague, right? But you serve them professionally, you have a professional relationship. But still, those relationships, and how are those the same and different sometimes from friendships, right? So it's all sort of murky. This goes back to what we talked about early in the book, which was the ambiguous nature of relationships sometimes. So all that said, I want to talk about relationships in some general and specific ways. So to the first of these, we're going to talk about friends. And I always like this expression that friends are the family we choose for ourselves. It's just a nice idea. It's nothing really from the research. But when we think about friends, let's consider what research recognizes as common elements of friendship. How do we distinguish whether or not somebody is in the category of friend? So friends are those who are willing to invest. They're willing to invest in us in terms of the time they give us and spend with us, the effort they put into the relationship, right? They actually take the trouble to keep it going even when there's some bumps in the road, right? Certain amount of energy that goes into a relationship. Being there for somebody takes some energy from you, and thought, which is to say that they think of you, right? So those are elements of friendship, right? This willingness to invest in you. A friend of mine, this was a couple months back, actually a few months back now, early on sort of in the pandemic. He knew I was home with the kids and working at the same time. And so he just texted me like, hey, how are things going? And it was just a way of showing that he had invested in me, right? So willingness to invest, that's a sign of friendship. Acceptance. That friendship, well, we're going to talk about acceptance actually a little bit later, but the idea that friends will take us for who we are. Let's think about friendship. They take us for who we are. Some research has indicated that those who identify as LGBTQ, This is more important for them than those who identify as straight, because there's so many more social issues and sometimes even family issues about acceptance, that for those who are straight, this is important, but may not rate as highly as for those who identify as LGBTQ, which I think makes, which it makes sense, right? It should be sort of intuitive. Right? Trust, you can trust a person. So that notion of trust and fidelity remains in a lot of relationships. But just trust that you can believe them, you can rely upon them, right? That there's trust there. They'll provide support to you. Now, we're going to talk about in a moment the different ways of providing support as well, but the idea that your friend will be there to provide support. So when something happens, that yeah, they'll they'll be there for you in a way that they think you would want, or at least a way that they know best. And we're going to talk about support in just or ways people might also get to support in just a second here, right? And also emotional closeness, right? That's the thing about friends versus just a casual acquaintance, say, right? We think about as emotional closeness, that there is some sort of emotional bond. Now, how is that emotional bond established? That's the thing I want to talk about next. That's why I say emotional closeness through dialogue, right? That's one way of establishing emotional closeness, is emotional closeness through dialogue. And I say expressive because we say it is expressive behavior, right? Because you're talking, there's dialogue, chitty chatty, right? Versus expressing emotional closeness through doing, which the technical term for that is instrumental behavior, right? So doing things. So here's a question to ask yourself, and we're going to go over these things in just a moment. But when you think about a close friend of yours, how do you know that person's your close friend? Is it because they're the one you can tell anything to and they tell everything to you? Dialogue or expressiveness, right? Or is it the person you know, if ever you need help with something or they need help, you two are going to be in touch, right? Now, it may be a certain overlap there, right? You may not be neatly in one category or the other, because there are different ways of expressing that closeness, and some people lean toward one more than toward the other. We used to say a lot that it was men relied more upon instrumental behavior and women upon expressive, but really that doesn't hold up a whole lot. We see a lot of let's say crossover, if you will. So it doesn't really hold up a whole lot, but those are different ways of establishing that closeness. So in establishing closeness through dialogue, there's a lot of talking and listening, right? This is the main activity. The main activity of the relationship is talking to each other, right? And so being on the phone might just be good enough because that's how you keep that relationship going, is through the talking, right? These are people who know their friends intimately, and they want their friends to know them intimately, right? So they know all the deep, dark secrets about their friends, and they want those are their close friends. They want them those deep, dark secrets about them too, right? That's a sign of establishing expressive in a relationship or in a friendship through dialogue, right? Again, they want deep understanding. So knowing everything is one thing, but just to really like understand you, to get you, to recognize what you're, why you're doing the things you're doing that other people think is odd, and they think, no, it's right. I know because that something else is going on at home right now, and this is how they work that out. I see that, I know that, I get them, right? They don't have to apologize for being sort of grumpy around me because I know that they're having a hard time in a different relationship, right? So they want that deep understanding. You know how they function and how they work, right? As opposed to when we have this instrumental behavior, the key thing isn't talking and listening, it's sharing activities. It's just doing things together, right? So we have this sort of stereotype of men shooting hoops, but it can be anything where people get together to do things. Think about my mom when she was in, I guess, about her 50s or so. She finally joined a social club. She'd never joined a social club before. You think like sort of the women's clubs and ladies' clubs. Well, she'd never joined one. She never liked them. But so, actually, our next door neighbor invited her to join the Kiwanis Club, which until sort of recently had been, at that time, exclusive for men. And my mom really liked that. And she really liked the guys that she was meeting there, making friends with them, because she's somebody who likes doing things. And so she liked the idea that, once a month on the weekend, they sold churros to raise money for this children's home, that they went out, they planted trees at the park, right? So doing things, that was how these people, bonded and did stuff together, right? So that was, again, it's just an example of both how people can use instrumental behavior defining a relationship through activities, and also the fact that, yeah, it's not a strict category of what men and women do, right? Right. These are people who in their friendships, they really want to do things for others. And I'm not saying those who are expressive don't want to do things, but that's how that's how they want to show their friends they care, is by doing something for them. That's how they want to show them they care. And this is also how others can show them that they care, is by doing things for them, right? So if you're ever in a relationship with somebody, maybe like a friendship, and they're almost like hurt you didn't call them when they needed a hand, it's probably because that they want to be able to show you that they cared, right? Yeah, and so that's what it is. So wanting to do for others and then hoping that others will want to do for them. And there's this idea of camaraderie, that there's this pleasure in the friendship that comes from working toward common goals, right? Working toward common goals can be, again, you're out there planting trees together, at the park. I'm hoping the city is giving you permission for that, right? Don't go rogue. They don't like it. But also those common goals could be that you're on a bowling league together or what have you, right? So that's the last element of friendship, and it's different ways of expressing emotional connection. This is not unique to friendship, but it's something we're talking about that we see in friendships, especially, right? Is that there's emotional closeness, and we see that friends will define each other in different ways, but how close they are, and might be more in terms of dialogue and more in terms of doing. I also want to look at the 6 stages of friendship development. And not all friendships are going to go through all stages, because sometimes it'll sort of peter out and fail. Sometimes we won't get to the last stage because it will be really a lifelong friendship. But so let's look at the 6 stages of friendship. And this is, by the way, all from Rollins. This is Rollins' model of friendship development. So the first stage of friendship is role limited. Think about the friends you have. How did you meet them? Right? You met them somehow. You met them at school. You met them at work. You met them when you went to a party or a get together or whatever at another friend's house or with some other friends, right? So you begin with role limited interaction, and think about when we talked about interpersonal and impersonal relationships in the last unit, right? So your interactions, again, they're role limited, that you are, because your classmates or colleagues, your coworkers, you are polite to each other, you're nice to each other, but you rely upon the sort of rules of that context. And even if it's a friend of a friend, and you all go to a restaurant, you're having dinner because your friend invited a bunch of people together, you're there and you're sort of being friendly, say, oh, hi, and how are you? But it's very role limited, right? You're the other person at this table, and so I'm just being pleasant to you. That's a role limited interaction. And of course, many, many times our relationships will not get past that stage. But then we get friendly relations. And so that is, even let's just say that it's, we'll use the example of it's somebody at work. So it's role limited interactions is you just talk about issues of work and you have a very professional relationship, and again, mostly professional talk. But friendly relations are things like, oh, you go kayaking. Yeah, I kayak too. Disclaimer, Wesley Berkeley does not kayak because Wesley Berkeley will die. Right, but still. So you say, oh yeah, I like to kayak too, right? And Caesar did a little bit of personal chit-chat at work, and how was your weekend? Oh, it was pretty good. I got some things done around the house. Oh, really? I could go on, right? But it's that simple chit-chat. It's that initial sort of exploring phase, that sort of phase that we see with romantic relationships. So you go from just being polite to each other at work to just little pleasantries. Moving toward friendship is when maybe now you do something outside what is very sort of easy and natural to do with how you initially met. So whether that's the person you met across the table at a dinner, at your friend's house, or if this is the person at work, you now make a little bit of extra effort here. And so it may be at work that you two on your lunch break decide to go and grab lunch together. This isn't a big thing. I mean, sometimes you end up sharing a ride with somebody you don't know very well at work. That happens all the time, right? But moving toward friendship, you're sort of like testing the waters of upping the ante. I think I've got a lot of metaphors going on there, right? But you're just sort of testing the waters of going deeper. That's more solid metaphor, right? That you went from the what'd you do this weekend stuff to going, hey, you want to go and grab lunch, or after work you say, oh my gosh, I am starving. Actually, I'm talking about going out to lunch. What am I saying? We're in a pandemic. Nobody would you actually you hardly can't see each other at work, but once upon a time, those happy days. You know what I mean, right? And so maybe after work, you two would have gone and grabbed a drink, whether alcoholic or not, right? But gone and grabbed a drink and some appetizers, at Applebee's or Chili's or whatever. Not any sort of romantic overture, but just like, yeah, we just thought we'd hang out after work. And so if somebody said, what do you do after work? You say, oh, I hung out with somebody I work with, right? And that's important there. You'd say, I hung out with somebody I worked with. Because we move to the next stage, nascent friendship. You stop referring to this as being the person you work with, or, oh yeah, I went and hung out for a little bit with a friend of a friend. You actually start referring to this person as your friend. And nascent, by the way, that word just means that something is almost fully formed, right? Think about teenagers, like sort of mid-year teenagers, 15, 16, and you go, I mean, they're nascent adults, right? Like they're almost an adult, but no one would quite call a 16-year-old an adult, right? And so you say, well, they're nascent, right? They're almost fully formed. They're almost there to being that stage. And that's what this is in friendship, that you are going to call each other friends, right? You're going to call each other friends. At this stage, it's probably things like you and your friend from work, right? But you now call them your friend that you met at work, right? So they go from your friend at work to your friend you met at work. And you know that you two both like comic book superhero movies. By the way, I gotta say, last good one I saw was Wonder Woman. Before that was Batman 1987. So a bit of or 1989. I'm a bit of a tough case. All right, anyway. So you know they like the superhero action movie things. And so when one's coming out, when you don't go and see it the first chance you get, you wait until you can get a hold of them or see them at work. Well, you probably actually at this point, no, you're texting and calling them outside of work. And you say, hey, I saw that movie out. Do you want to go see it? Right? If you want to go see the thing, you hold off because you know they might want to go see. Right? So you're making time and place for them in your relationship. And think about those stages of a relationship we just talked about, right? That people are investing in you. That's a way a person invests in you, is they hold out a space for you in their life. So that's a nascent friendship. And you'd call this a friendship. Then we get stabilized friendships. These are friendships that I like to think of them as like being big trees. I like to garden, and so I think of garden metaphors a lot. So small plants and flowers, there's not a whole lot to them, so you got to make sure you're like always keeping them watered. And if they're a really dry year, they might die if they don't get any water. But trees, once they get big, suppose when they're little saplings, when they get big trees, there's a lot to them. And so if it's a really dry year, it might be hard for them, but that tree is still there and it's going to come back next year. And that's how I think of the stabilized friendship. Listen, you move to another town, another state, another country. We don't get a chance to talk as often because life gets hectic, life gets crazy, sort of thing. I shouldn't say crazy, but life gets hectic. That's okay. You're still friends. So I think about my friend who was the best man at my wedding. So he and I became friends. I'll save you the story of all these stages with him. We became friends when I was in college. I guess he was in college too. He was returning to school, but we were at different colleges. Anyway, met through his then girlfriend. Then we became roommates, and then we moved apart, but we sort of stayed in touch a little bit. But I could always sort of like talk to him about stuff, and we used to hang out some, but then I went off to grad school. He was in California, went to Arizona, then I went to Louisiana State University where I got my doctorate. He then got married and moved to South Carolina. And so now I'm here in Tennessee, so now we're sort of closest to each other. We didn't talk a whole lot, but when I needed a best man for my wedding, it was the first person I naturally thought of was Jeff. Jeff was my first thought, right? And he was, of course, glad to do it. And it was nice when he came to the wedding and he gave his toast and he said, we were talking. We've been friends for, I think at that point, about 15 years. But his idea that we didn't stay in touch a whole lot, but we considered each other friends. I mean, there's just that, there's not like a lot of apology for, I'm so sorry, it's been a long time. Yeah, it's been a long time, whatever, let's just catch up. So it's a very stabilized friendship. It's just solid. It's like that tree. It did get water this year. That's okay, because it's going to hold tight. It's big enough and strong enough. It'll be there next year. But then sometimes friendships move into this last stage of waning. It's stabilized, but then maybe as you two grow, you start growing apart. So that tree can handle a drought, but it's 10 years of drought, and so the thing dies, right? Or there's a forest fire. Some giant blow up and you two just separate. It's a waning friendship, and it happens sometimes. It's really sort of heartbreaking to have it happen or even to see it happen, right? But a waning friendship is one that's just, it was very stable, but something happened, and it sort of tipped it over a bit, and it's just not working so well anymore. And so you start going back to, they're your friend, but you don't feel as comfortable with them. Those characteristics we talk about of friendship are sort of disappearing, right? And so the friendship may wither and die, right? Kind of sort of sad there, didn't I? But those are the stages of friendship, right? And we see how they are similar, but yet sort of unique from stages of romantic relationship. And that's going to be a theme that we're going to see repeatedly in these series of lectures, is that friendship is similar but different from romantic relationships. So now we're going to move into family, and for that, I'm going to pause and start the next lecture.